Knowledge for Men, episode 68.
Welcome to knowledgeformen.com, where you're going to grow into the man you want to be. Your life will never be the same again. I can guarantee it.
Hey guys, one of the questions I've been getting a lot lately is, can you put together a list of the best books and success quotes from all of your guests and combine that into one guide? And so I've actually just done that. It's called the top 30 books and success quotes every man must live by. So out of all of the podcast episodes I've done, over 60, I finally put together this guide, and you can download it for free at kfmfree.com. Again, that's kfmfree.com. All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm here with Randy Flood. He's the co-founder and director of the Institute for Prevention and Treatment of Mascupathy. His foundational role is the culmination of 20 years of creating and developing specialized clinical services for men that address anger management, fathering, sex addiction, emotional intelligence, parenting, divorce, male identity, midlife crises, substance abuse, and relationships. He's also the co-author of Mascupathy and Stop Hurting the Women You Love. Randy, I'm happy to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
All right, and as always, we always start off the show with a favorite success quote or something that the guest has lived by. So Randy, what do you got for us?
Well, there's several of them, so I will try to just come up with the first one. I think the one I would like to start with would be Susan Faludi, who said this in her book, Stiffed, but she said, men's task is not in the end to figure out how to be masculine. Rather, their masculinity lies in figuring out how to be human.
I like that. That requires some thinking.
Yeah.
And what does that mean to you?
Well, I think that we've kind of, the 20th century, pre-20th century version of masculinity is kind of comes from this binary position of polarization of gender, and, to accommodate where we were in the Industrial Revolution, moving from agrarian society. And I think we ended up living these separate worlds and having separate gender roles. And so we ended up developing half of our humanity in order to adapt and be a fit male for that time in our society. And now that we're in the new millennium, I think that's outdated. And I think that there's plenty of opportunity for us as men to develop a more balanced masculinity that includes feminine energy such as compassion and community and vulnerability, while hanging on to masculine energy such as strength of and competition, and in necessary situations, aggression.
And so, guys listening, this is going to be the topic of our episode for today. And before we dive into the topic, I'm really interested, Randy, in how you got into this field of study and kind of how you got started with what you do. So if you can share with the audience first that.
Okay. Well, it's all started when I was thrusted into a forensic practice in an internship where I was working with court-ordered men who had to come into treatment for being bad boys, if you remember that show, where they got into some type of criminal trouble for either drunk driving, domestic violence, bar fights, sexual acting out, other types of criminal behavior. And there was an emphasis during that time of just, working with court-ordered clients, and that was the specialty. And I stepped back at that time in my career and looked at the people in the room. I was doing a lot of groups, and I said, they're all men. And I'm like, what's going on with men? Why is it that men are predominantly having what we call externalization disorders or an acting out problem? So I began to study pro-feminist literature, gender construction, Michael Kimmel's work, Paul Kivel, Jackson Katz, John Lee. There's a lot of folks that influenced my thinking. And what I began to realize and become more clear about it is that men at large suffer from externalization or acting out problems because we raise boys to cut off half their humanity, which would enable them to have more emotional intelligence. And when we're not connected to our interior life and we're not aware of the fear and the shame and the loneliness or the need for community and love, when we're not connected to that, then we end up feeling a malaise, and we end up feeling unhappy or discontented And then we are at greater risk of acting out that discontent onto others. And that can lead to getting in trouble with the law. So then I began to expand my interest in saying, well, I just don't want to work with men who get into legal trouble. And so then I expanded and began working with the more general population of men, and expanded my practice to work with just men who are struggling with careers, midlife crisis, divorces, struggling with their identity, sexual orientation, and started doing more general men's work. And so that is kind of the story, the origin of my work with men, or interest in working with men. And then I co-authored a couple books, and I'm sure we'll get to talking about that as well.
We will definitely touch on your books. And now I'm curious to know if you saw a difference in challenges amongst the men who were getting in trouble with the law compared to the men who were in the general population.
More of a matter of degree and scope. It wasn't so much that, I think, again, as society, and the way that we've insulated ourselves and been in denial about this problem, is that we saw these statistics that we see with men predominantly acting out. And we're just not asking the difficult questions about what's going on with men and our boys. Well, how are we raising these guys to turn out this way? Because I just don't believe that. You look at a young boy in his joy and spontaneity and his emotionality and his desire to crawl up on laps and snuggle in and be tickled. I mean, there's nothing inherent in the way that we raise our boys to jump off the laps, run around, climb trees, and say, basically, I don't need lap time anymore. I don't need to have emotional connection. I just need to play football and suck it up and be aggressive and popular. So I think that we all, as men, can struggle with this idea of, am I man enough? Society's limited and narrow vision of masculinity, that real men are tough, strong, in control, take charge, are sexual, have conquests, are popular, are aggressive. And if you're anything outside that box, if you're sensitive or compassionate, or you need to ask for help for something, then you're weak, you're a pussy, you're a wimp, you're a fag. We send this message to young boys that there's something that if you show those attributes, that somehow you're acting like a girl, or you're acting like a gay man. And that is the message to that, is that that's antithetical to being male, that you're weak. And so a lot of men will buy into that, and in a variety of ways will spend their life trying to prove that they're man enough. And so the general population, even though they might not be getting in trouble with domestic violence or drunk driving, there's a lot of guys that secretively struggle with that idea that, am I man enough? Have I reached the pinnacle of masculinity? What do I have to do to measure up?
Yeah, very true. And I think it's a question that a lot of men ask themselves. And that's why I think sports and MMA and UFC and these physical sports are so popular for men, because it's a way you can exert your masculinity and also measure your masculinity against other men. Well, I want to know, what's your response to something like that? When someone sits down with you and asks you, I want to work on my masculinity, or I'm having challenges with my masculinity, how can I become a better man? What's your response to something like that?
Well, the first thing I try to do with men is to try to help them deconstruct the masculinity that's been handed to them by their fathers and uncles in society and by the media, that, as Susan Faludi talks about, only develops half their humanity. And so it's a difficult discussion with men, because it's such an embedded and ingrained belief system, in that there is this doubt, potentially emasculating them, or I didn't get that training, that I missed that school, or I didn't get that kind of mentoring, and I'm giving them information that's going to weaken them or make them less manly. So that's one of the reasons why we run groups at the center and at the Institute, so that men have exposure to other men who have been at it longer than us, not longer than us, but longer than them. And so that they are in a community of men, and there's elders that they have access to, so that those men can help them nurture them along in this idea and this notion of revisioning masculinity to come up with a definition that is more balanced and is more liberating. And then they can be more inspired to work toward that vision and to create a life for themselves that embraces that, and then to be able to have the strength and the groundedness to withstand the shaming and the humiliation that will go on in their life from maybe men in their life who say, "What's wrong with you? You know, you're a wimp, you're a pussy, you're a ladies man, you're pussy whipped," or some kind of shaming language that will put them back in their box that is constricting and unfulfilling.
So a part of that work is to help guys understand that the social conditioning they went through in their past is what's holding them back.
Exactly. It's like getting them a taste of the honey and to give them this, see other men who've been at this in terms of this liberation and having the courage to live life differently and more broadly and more expansively, that they then can become inspired to do that for themselves.
I see. And what are some of the things that really help guys open up and feel more comfortable with themselves and their masculinity inside these groups?
I think some of the biggest influences or experiences they have in groups are when men begin taking off the mask or pulling back the curtain and to reveal the little old man working the levers of the great powerful Oz. And we look at that as Jackson Katz talks about that as a metaphor to look at masculinity as a pose, a guise, an act that we all put up to shield our vulnerability and hide our humanity. And so when they see other men pull back the curtain and talk about, say, "I'm scared of this relationship I'm in, is I'm not happy and I've got to face some tough things. I don't know if I can go through a divorce and put my kids through it. I don't know how to talk to my wife to improve it. I'm really scared and insecure. I don't know what to do." To hear a man talk about his vulnerability, about this place of being insecure and unsure and uncertain, while at the same time having other men say, "Yeah, Bill, I'm glad you're talking about it. I'm thinking about getting a divorce," and just telling the men what's broken in the marriage, what she's doing wrong, and then what they're going to do to fix it. And there's kind of this more invulnerable, take charge, I got it all figured out, and I'm just going to tell you, and you guys are going to give me accolades, and then we're going to do a high five, and then we're going to go play some softball. They're experiencing a different sense of what it means to be a real human being and talking about our real lives and the emotions that go on underneath the lives that we live. And the men don't pull back the curtain and reveal that because they don't think it's safe, because they are scared that these other men are going to shame them, that something's wrong with you. Why don't you have it figured out? Why don't you take charge of your life? What do you mean you're insecure? So that kind of culture emboldens them to be more real and honest, and it gives them an experience of liberation and honesty that they find very rewarding.
Yeah, I could see that. And one thing I want to point out is when he said men get to finally experience what it means to be a real human being. And that's really powerful. And because as men, we're taught to hold on to our emotions and just handle it. Yet that can be really damaging at times.
Right. Well, the statistics are very clear that it's damaging. And in terms of the men, die earlier than women, and there's greater levels of acting out and criminal behavior. We talked about the shootings and the divorces and discontent at work. I mean, there's so many signs out there that this definition is not working for men, and we have to figure out a way to evolve into this new millennium and create more balance and liberation for men.
Yeah. What kind of suggestions do you have for men to be more vulnerable and to open up more around other men and those around them as well, others?
Well, it's difficult because there's not a lot of safe places sometimes. And again, for the younger generation, I do think that there's hope out there. I don't know what kind of conversations you hear from the young men that that listen to your podcast, but I got a 24-year-old son, and I see him experiencing greater liberation with his male friends. I mean, when they see each other, they hug each other. there's not such a fear of homophobia that somehow if I want to hug you, that means I want to have sex with you. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, that's just such an absurd notion that limits men. And you see grown men, brothers and fathers and sons, that are 60 and 50, that haven't seen each other. They grew up with each other and slept in the same bedroom, same parents, and they haven't seen each other for a year, and they shake each other's hands. I mean, really? So I think that there's signs in our culture, and for the younger men, with new ideas coming from this evolution of consciousness, that I think are seeds of hope that maybe we're heading in the right direction, that we will break down some of those walls and barriers that have created this deep loneliness that men feel and this lack of connection with each other. And so hopefully they don't have to use sex as their only vehicle for human connection, because I think historically that's the only vehicle we've given men. We say, girls have cooties and boys only play with each other shoulder to shoulder. And the only way you're going to get human connection is to have sex with someone. And that's a pretty lonely existence.
I think it is a really lonely place. And I think a lot of guys will set out to conquer women in the physical sense. And I think these guys will often struggle with relationships, and that they'll lack empathy and the ability to connect deeply with another woman because they're just after that physical, the sex, and just conquering women in that way.
Yeah, I think that's why, again, we have kind of this essentialist view of sexuality, or this biological reductionistic view of male sexuality, that somehow men want sex is because they're just kind of more virile and just, that's just the way they're born and wired and stuff. Yeah, we have sex drives. Women have sex drives. But if the only way you experience human connection and get a taste of the honey with intimacy is through sex, then that's what you're going to be obsessed about. And then you have to come up with strategies. Well, how am I going to get sex? Well, make it a game, make it a conquest, and even maybe make it that there's competition with your peers of how many people did you get laid this weekend? And yeah, I scored. And it's kind of that kind of discussion and male bravado. And I just don't think that that's the best of men. I think that we're capable of something greater than that in terms of experiencing intimacy in a variety of ways, and sex being one of those, and a celebration of connection.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. Surface layer connections amongst men, and avoiding the vulnerability, avoiding going deep, and really sharing what's really going on in your mind. It's a lot of surface layer connections.
Right, and we think a lot of the symptoms that men have, we think the mental health community kind of gets it backwards. They think that, the men have a depression and anxiety and addiction problems and that impact their relationships. And that you treat the addiction, depression, and anxiety, then they'll have better relationships. And we think it's backwards, that we socialize men to disconnect from their emotions and human disconnection, and that's why they have symptoms of depression and anxiety and externalization problems. And so if you can help men redefine masculinity so they can give themselves greater permission to make those connections with humans, with other men, with women, not just through sex, then we think that their symptoms have a way of disappearing and you don't see the level of mental health issues. So that's what we're passionate about.
Yeah, and in your book, Mascupathy, you touch on this topic really well. And the book aims to answer the question, why do men do the things that they do?
Yes.
So, Randy, go ahead and share with the audience more about this book.
I think it's going to give us more precise language to talk about the complexities of this issue. And I've said about, the pro-feminist men's movement, the mythopoetic men's movement, and other folks who've been working at this for quite some time have talked about this rigid definition of masculinity being constricting to our humanity. There's even a gender role strain paradigm by Joseph Pleck that we talk about in our book, that when we put women and men in these gender boxes, it creates an actual strain on their humanity, a constriction that cuts off half of their humanity in the name of femininity or the name of masculinity. And it's traumatic to their human development, and it creates dysfunction in their life if they're in these rigid boxes. So when the women's movement started talking about how men need to be more feminine and more liberated and more compassionate, a lot of people had a negative reaction to that, as though it was anti-male, that people didn't like men and men were bad and they were dangerous. And so there was all this competition and debate about, and people got stuck in those opposing arguments and that polarization. So our thought is that if, with this new term, Mascupathy, which we're saying is the pathology of masculinity, it's this exaggeration of masculine energy, of aggression and competition and invulnerability, while minimizing feminine energy such as vulnerability, compassion, sensitivity, relationship skills, emotional intelligence. That if we develop boys into this rigid definition of masculinity, that you're actually socializing them into a disorder, a disease that we're kind of terming Mascupathy, that really is toxic to their humanity, and it erodes the soft tissue of their ability to make human connections. And so our hope is that it'll free us up to talk in a more accurate way about why we need to stop raising boys in this toxic way, because it raises them or socializes them into a disorder. And we're going to call it Mascupathy. And we're saying that it's not healthy, and these are the symptoms of it. This is how it minimizes contentment and joy and satisfaction in your life. This is how it creates externalization and problems with criminal behavior. This is how men will spend time in their man caves and not have human connections, or their wife says, I need to talk to you about going home for Christmas with your family and some of the concerns I have, and they say, I don't want to talk about it. We're just going. And women are dissatisfied with men's inability to engage in these deeper conversations, these more complicated conversations, because they can't manage the emotionality that comes up in them. And so they isolate or they externalize. So we want to define this pathology of masculinity so that we can begin working toward socializing males differently, and then we can begin offering treatment models and prevention approaches so that we don't see Mascupathy in our society as much. That would be our mission and goal with creating the name.
And what are some of the challenges that you're facing with Mascupathy, or what would prevent Mascupathy from succeeding?
Well, I think that there will be a backlash, as you might anticipate, in terms of some people. There are going to be some factions of folks that will think that the term is bastardizing masculine energy, it's debasing masculine energy, it's marginalizing it, and now we're even calling it a pathological name, Mascupathy. So there will be folks in that camp that'll think it's anti-male and it's not going to liberate us. And then I think there might be folks in another camp that might be thinking that we're giving men an excuse for their bad behavior. We're kind of saying, oh, you poor things, you were socialized as young boys, got kicked off your lap, you didn't get the kind of modeling and nurturing to help you with emotional intelligence, so you can't talk about your feelings, and so, just figure it out, grow up. We're not going to give you some kind of disorder and give you some kind of pass. So I think we will get kickback from those two different sides, and our goal, of course, would be to try to engage those folks in helping them understand that we don't want either one of those. So we want to tell people that we're not against masculinity. We think it's beautiful. It just needs to grow up into a more integrated, more liberated presentation. And then we also want to be able to make sure we are not telling men that they have an excuse for their bad behavior. And we want to make sure that we tell men that although you may not have asked to struggle with mascupathy and you were raised in a society that kind of socialized it into you, it is your responsibility. Just as much if your doctor said you've got some diabetes and you've got to watch your diet, you can't eat whatever the heck you want and then complain that you're having a diabetic reaction. You got to take responsibility. So we want to be able to engage both of those folks who might have concerns about the term, and so that we can make sure that hopefully we're working toward a similar vision.
Right. And Randy, one of the current events that just occurred not too long ago would be an extreme form of what can happen to a boy or a man when he holds in his emotions.
Yes.
And doesn't have a support system around him, someone to share his thoughts, feelings, and concerns with. And that would be the shooting in Santa Barbara with Elliot Rogers. I'm wondering if this is a topic that you'd like to explore, and if so, what are your thoughts and feelings on this guy?
No, that's fine. We actually we open up a preface and an introduction, and then we are chapter 1. We struggled with opening the book up with discussing shooters. We went back and forth with our publicists about this, and there was some concern that it was going to turn people off when we're trying to say, well, shooters is kind of a bellwether. It's a sign for us in the 21st century to wake up. It's our wake up call. And similar to, when we saw someone like Karen Carpenter, who died of anorexia, a female, a predominantly female disorder, although men are having more eating disorders. But it's kind of society's way for women internalizing the violence toward themselves, and they end up starving themselves trying to fit into this, distorted view of beauty. So our thinking is with the shooters, it's the same situation as these men like Elliot Rogers. He can tell by his manifesto that he's struggling mightily with his masculinity, with feeling man enough. And as I talked about earlier in our interview, you can tell he buys into that old definition that real men have sexual conquest, real men have access to women, real men have women fawning over him. And they take charge, and they're in control, and they gain the respect of their peers. And he didn't have any of that. And so my estimation is he was lonely, and he dealt with a lot of shame, and he was scared that he wasn't going to get what he wanted and what he felt he deserved in life. And Michael Kimmel talks about it in his Angry White Male book as a aggrieved entitlement. That Elliot was like, I'm entitled to respect. And so there's this kind of this misogynistic view or tinge to it. So rather than talk about these feelings, or maybe he wasn't even in touch with them, he probably, if you were to ask him, are you scared? Are you insecure? Are you lonely? I don't know that he would have the language to even delve into his inner life, which was just kind of percolating below the surface before he developed all this hate ideology. And so then what is the most masculine way to go out in the world? You look at the video games that are out there, and all this shooters, and you're walking across blown up buildings and you're still surviving, and you've got more points and more levels. I mean, there's just this grandiose way of, I'm going to man up, I'm going to buy a bunch of weapons, and I'm going to show them. And the people, he had a target that he was after, and some of the shooters, I think, don't necessarily have a particular target. They just want to go and show that they can kick some ass. And they go out and they shoot. And they externalize, and all their pain and loneliness and shame just spills out into our society and onto our streets. And then we have this shallow conversation afterwards about access to mental health or gun control. It's like we've had greater access to mental health in 2014 than we ever did in 1950. And there were men going out in the schools shooting with shotguns and only able to take one out because they had to reload, or, you know what I mean? This is a 21st century phenomenon, and I think it's a crisis in masculinity. There's something deeper going on in our culture. And until we start having those conversations about the American masculine identity and this idea of mascupathy and the pathology of masculinity, I don't think we're going to get to the underlying core issue that's driving what I think is a predominantly male problem of shooting.
And this is a touchy subject. I mean, it's recent. A lot of the listeners of this podcast are in California, or there's a large majority.
Yeah.
And you bring up a good point. You know, it's not about access to mental health. And I know in the newspaper, Elliot's father was pointing fingers at the NRA for not having better gun control laws. But like you mentioned, there's something deeper going on here.
Right. And I don't mean to dismiss. I'm a believer in gun control, reasonable gun control. You know, we control the shoes that we have to wear when we go into airplanes. We got to take them off and walk bare feet. And everybody goes, oh, okay, that's reasonable, because one person tried to blow someone up with a tennis shoe. And so, but when it comes to looking at gun control, I think there's a lot of masculinity tied into gun ownership. And so when you tell a person, we're going to have some control over your gun purchases, we're essentially saying we're going to have some control over your masculine identity. And people feel assaulted by that, or that's imposing. And so that's why we have to have a deeper conversation about masculinity and mascupathy, rather than just talking about it as gun control. Or if the women were shooting at the same rate, I bet you anything, when we had the national conversation after another shooting, we would be asking the question, what's going on with women? What are we doing with our girls? How are we raising our girls so that they're going out and shooting innocent students in schools? What are we doing wrong? But we don't ask that question when it's boys, because we think it's like hurricanes or tornadoes. It's just part of the nature of things, and bad things happen, and guys will be guys, boys will be boys, rather than thinking, well, maybe it's something we could do different in how we raise them, and we could maybe eliminate some of these tragedies. That's what I'd like to see us talk about.
And if there's anyone listening that is struggling with these challenges, Randy, what kind of advice would you have for these guys?
Well, again, depending on the scope and severity of their struggle, and because we look at, it's hard to insulate yourself from mascupathy, because I think it's kind of like saying, as a white person, I don't struggle with racism. You know, I'm pretty tolerant. That right there is a level of denial. So to say that you're not exposed by mascupathy would not be realistic. That we're all raised in this culture. So what degree are you struggling with it? Are you really lonely and isolated and disconnected? Are you suffering from addictions, violence, depression, anxiety? So, you know, these severe forms, or is it more mild, where you're struggle with having deep connections with men, but you have a satisfying relationship with a partner, and things are going pretty well, a satisfying job. So that would be the first thing. What level are you struggling? And then if you are, to start moving in a direction of creating greater connections with people, so you have places to talk, whether that's in a men's circle, whether that's the current friends you have, and start having these deeper discussions. Buy our book, make it a book study. I'd love to see people talk about this and give us feedback. If you're at a severe level of disconnection and you have some of those more severe problems that I mentioned, get into some counseling. You know, why are women the primary consumers of counseling? Is it because they have more problems? No, it's because there's greater permission for a woman to get help. So I think men struggle with asking for help sometimes because they think that makes them weak. So get a good counselor, get a good mentor, and reach out and talk to people. Because I do think that's the solution to a lot of this, is men speaking up, reaching out. Go to the Mankind Project. It's a weekend getaway for men, and they do some good work. There's just a lot of stuff out there, books to read, circles to be involved in, to take some steps.
Thanks for that, Randy. And now let's move into the knowledge round. Are you ready?
Yes.
Do you ever have so many books to read that you end up not reading at all? You have so many books in your library, on your list of books that you want to read, but you don't know which books to tackle first? I know in all of my episodes, I ask guests, what are your favorite books? What are your most influential books? And they always list 3 or 4. And I always ask guests for their favorite success quote. I find that quotes can be so powerful sometimes, yet There's so many available. So what I've done is I put together a list of the top 30 books and top 30 success quotes that I think every man must live by. And these are directly from guests on the Knowledge for Men podcast. And as you know, some of the guests on my show sold their companies for millions of dollars. They're running billion-dollar organizations. They're dating coaches. They're health coaches. They're entrepreneurs. They're celebrities on TV. They're mixed martial artists. Just this wide variety of great minds. And I put together a list of the top 30 books and top 30 success quotes that every man must live by. You can download this guide for free at kfmfree.com. Again, that's kfmfree.com.
Welcome to the Knowledge Round, where the guests will be asked rapid-fire questions to give the audience invaluable pieces of wisdom to help transform their lives. Starting in 3, 2, 1, showtime.
All right, Randy, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's feeling lost or unsure of their purpose in life?
To tell someone that they're lost and unsure of their purpose. Take the step of vulnerability and to be able to tell someone that's what you're struggling with. Pull back the curtain, let them know that, and do it with someone you trust. And let the conversation start, and I think you'll walk down the path of finding greater purpose and connection.
I think that's something we could all do. You know, it's something you have access to just let someone know. It's something that can be implemented today.
But Andrew, it's the most difficult for men. Men want, most people want answers to that question. And I'm saying the first step to getting answers to that question is telling someone you don't have the answer.
I like that. And Randy, what was holding you back from becoming the man you are now today?
Fear and shame that if I were to develop more liberation of my masculinity, if I was more affectionate with other men and showed my connection and emotion, that people would think that there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't man enough. So fear held me back, and courage gave me greater ability to move forward and seek more love and openness.
And can you name a person who's had a large impact on your life, maybe a mentor? What did he say to you that really had that impactful moment for you?
Well, my own personal work with the men in my life. I've had a therapist that I've worked with over the years. You know, I don't think it was one person. I've given myself the opportunity to have deep connections with men who cared and loved me. And I think that connection with men, without all the complexity and cloudiness of sexuality, is what really helped me get into deep places in my life.
All right, well said. And can you go ahead and name 3 of your most influential books and explain why?
Well, I would say the original ones: Paul Kivel, Men's Work, Frank Pittman, Man Enough, and Robert Pasick, Awakening from the Deep Sleep. And I'll say one more: Terry Real, I Don't Want to Talk About It.
Okay, yeah, I haven't heard of really any of those books, so I'm gonna have to check those out right after the show.
Yeah, those were the origins of my studies. So those are old ones, like in the 90s.
Oh wow, okay. And now, Randy, imagine here's a scenario for you. If you had 60 seconds with your 20-year-old self, what would you tell him to do, and what would you tell him not to do?
Wow. Well, first of all, if I could, my 20-year-old self was pretty anxious, scanning the environment, looking. So I would say, Randy, let's sit down, and I want to make eye contact with you, and it's okay. It's somehow to try to make him feel safe and settle down. And then I would say that it's going to be a long journey, and I know that you're an adventurous man, and you have a lot of courage. But each threshold you push through, there's going to be another one to climb. And I just encourage you to have the strength and courage to reach out to others and keep climbing, because life is a great adventure, and you're going to open up to more and more horizons. Enjoy the ride.
Very good. And what would you tell him not to do?
What not to do? Don't get lost in acting out behaviors, stupid stuff, to prove your masculinity or to just drown out painful feelings. Just try to work on your grounding, and don't try to get too hung up on proving yourself and looking for approval and affirmation from others. That find your own center and look for that, your own truth. Don't look for the world to mirror back what makes you feel lovable.
All right. And Randy, do you have an underrated characteristic that you think if every man would work on, they would see significant results in their life?
I would say the courage to be vulnerable. I think for men, there's this obsession with invulnerability, posing. And I think that, to me, it takes a lot of courage to pull back that curtain and take off the mask. And so it's a redefining of courage to say, you can see me, and I have the strength to stand when you see me.
I think that one's underrated, and a lot of guys are scared to do that. It takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable. So now, just kind of summarizing some of your main points, Randy, what's your philosophy on life and success?
Well, I would say that with men's work, I would say my philosophy on success is that for men to develop, it sounds kind of trite, but to work on developing their full humanity and reclaiming their rights as human beings, kind of reinventing themselves into being full human beings and not sacrificing half their humanity to achieve the pinnacle of masculinity.
All right, very good there. And Randy, that's going to conclude the knowledge round. So let's go into things you're working on today. What's getting you out of bed in the morning, Randy?
This new book, Mascupathy, Understanding and Healing the Malaise of American Manhood. I think I hope to be involved in having conversations with people like you, Andrew, and others about this new idea and open up the conversation and engaging with people. It's exciting.
All right. And go ahead, Randy, and give yourself a plug so my audience can connect with you going forward.
Well, they can go to our website, mascupathy.org, MASCUPATHY.org, and read about us and buy the book. And then we also offer phone coaching services and consultations and trainings as well. And you can access me through the menscenter.org, where those counseling services are available. So www.menscenter.org. So those are the two access points.
All right, Randy, thank you so much for sharing your story and the lessons that you've given us today on the Knowledge for Men show. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right, and that's going to wrap up episode 68 with Randy Flood. And your challenge item for today is to reach out to a man that you're close with, but you probably just don't have a lot of really deep conversations. Yet this other person would probably be open to the idea if you were to bring it up. It would just take some courage and someone to really initiate that. So your action item is to find someone who you want to have a conversation with and share something that's really bothering you right now. Share something that's, tell someone what's really going on. And have that conversation and just take it deep. And if you feel comfortable approaching this person, then more often than not, this person's going to sit down with you and go deep as well with you and share what's going on with them. And together, you guys can really have some good connection. And that's what I'm hoping for you. I'm hoping that you get that out of this episode and you take this challenge. All right, until next time, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast show. It's been a pleasure having you be a part of a thriving community of men who want to crush it in all aspects of life. I'm on a mission here to inspire millions of guys, and with your help, we're going to make a dent in the universe. Check out knowledgeformen.com for a ton of free content that's designed to help you live a remarkable life. Again, that's knowledgeformen.com. I hope to see you there. And always remember, 2014 is the official year of the crush, where we take action to get the life we've always dreamed of. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, and until next time, let's do it.